Hello, beautiful soul. This video is especially for you if you are just starting out in your awakening journey and you're realizing, oh my gosh, I've got all these spiritual gifts that I didn't know I had. Or if you've been on the path for a while, but you feel like you're on a treadmill running into dead ends and never quite stepping into the true spiritual power you know you have. Let me start with a story. Back in 2012, I started a small local meetup group for women, and I didn't know it, but I was just about to enter a huge spiritual awakening myself. So I was already starting to attract people on similar paths. And I remember one woman really clearly. She had really amazing spiritual gifts, and she had dreams of starting a healing center. And she had invested all her life savings into this vision, but it didn't work out. And she was finding her financial power just drained away as she tried to do justice to her gifts. This isn't a unique story. I've heard variations of it countless times in the spiritual community. People awakening to their gifts, getting excited about them, and feeling compelled to build their lives around these abilities. For some, the transition is seamless. They get whatever credentials they need, attract clients, everything works out. But I think that's the minority. For many others, it becomes a very long and often challenging journey. And that brings me to what I want to talk about today, the difference between spiritual gifts and spiritual power. When spiritual gifts awaken, many people equate these gifts with spiritual power. And this is a mind trap I've definitely fallen into myself. But here's the truth. They're connected, but they're not the same thing. Someone can have countless spiritual gifts and still be in a very disempowered place. Think of it like this cordless drill, right? We've got various attachments. This is a screwdriver, this is a drill bit, got a drywall bit here. We can plug them in, paint stirrers, all sorts of things. These are like your spiritual gifts, right? Gift of healing, communication with spirits, seeing auras. All of these things are like attachments you can put into your drill, right? But if your battery isn't charged and plugged in and aligned, right? All these attachments are not going to do anything productive, okay? The power, your spiritual power, is like this battery, okay? It's what enables you to use these gifts in a way that's aligned, meaningful, and brings health and abundance to your life and others, okay? So setting this drill aside, let's talk about what happens spiritually through the awakening process. We're working with something called Kundalini, which is essentially spiritual power. And through awakening, we move this power from being dormant within us to being activated. Okay, in Eastern traditions, this energy is described as feminine, sometimes called Shakti or the Holy Spirit in Western traditions. And it's said to lie dormant at the base of the spine, and when awakened, it wants to rise up to meet the Godhead or Spirit. Okay, so it's visualized in different ways in different traditions, but basically, we're looking at that union, that unity coming together of the spiritual power within us to the spiritual power of the cosmos, of God or Spirit. Okay, so when this power within us flows properly, it rises upwards until it reaches the higher levels of our energy system, and that's where it can unite, okay? So the primary goal is for this feminine spiritual energy within us to unite with the masculine of the cosmos, which is the directive energy that helps to direct our own spiritual power, right? And allow it to bloom. Okay, and that process of union brings wholeness, right, and full alignment with our inner guidance, our inner guru. Okay, and that's spiritual power, right, and it culminates in enlightenment, right. But when we have that spiritual power flowing in a proper way within us, things on the outside begin to flow naturally, right? So when you have a desire, that's when we can start taking your will and having it manifest, okay? Um, but here's what can happen, okay? This spiritual energy, the Shakti, can get diverted into different channels that don't lead to that culminating union, okay? When this happens, it can light up brain centers that unlock spiritual gifts without actually stabilizing the spiritual power within us, okay? The result is chaos, right? It's like having a drill that's like going haywire that you can't really control. But even more, right? The spiritual gifts themselves can become a distraction from your true path of spiritual awakening, which is about union and oneness, okay? So, to be clear, we don't necessarily need a ton of spiritual gifts to come into oneness. The gifts are wonderful. We wouldn't have them if they couldn't be used in beautiful ways. But if we don't have proper alignment, we can start chasing our gifts, attaching ourselves to them, attaching ourselves to the idea that I have to use these gifts. This is my purpose, right? We let the gifts guide us rather than coming into center and allowing our inner guru to guide us, okay? So when we start chasing spiritual gifts, it often takes us away from our power, right? And it's counterintuitive, but it can happen. But when we focus on developing our spiritual power, the gifts become a natural, easy extension of who we are when the time is right, okay? So how do we develop spiritual power? It's about developing sovereignty, being so fully connected with the cosmos, the great spirit or God within, that you are directed by that sacred power within and without being pulled off into other directions. Okay. So as this happens, you develop a real sense of what strengthens you versus what weakens you. Okay. Strengthening means it helps you join with your spiritual essence. Weakening means it pulls you away from that path of off center. Okay. True spiritual power also means not being controlled by others and not attempting to control others. Okay. So there's people that have apparent power, but they're using it to try to control other people. They're not really in their true spiritual power. Okay. So your influence will grow and does grow exponentially as you come into your true power. But it's not about exercising control over others. You're really focusing on yourself. And from that inner connection, you're guided to whatever actions are appropriate. Okay. So when you develop this power, things naturally flow and become relatively easy, usually, although there's ups and downs. But in general, when you are really centered in your power, you're in the flow. Things start to fall into place. Unlike when you're chasing gifts and encountering obstacles because you're focused on the wrong target, right? So I don't pretend to have the secret to enlightenment or to developing personal power. I'm on this journey as much as you are, but I can tell you who does have that secret, and that's the ancient wisdom traditions around the world, okay? When we awaken spiritually, it's common to step away from religious traditions that no longer serve us. And that's a healthy step. It's about connecting with your inner voice. But sometimes we throw the baby out with the bathwater. Every religious tradition has an esoteric core, a school of wisdom beneath the outer surface. And for those who are awakened, these esoteric traditions can provide valuable guidance. Okay. So if you are floundering or feeling like you're going in circles spiritually, I encourage you to put it out there in your prayers. I'm looking for the spiritual tradition that will help me, the one I'm most aligned with, and trust that it will show up for you in the way that's appropriate for you. Okay, it might be an Eastern tradition, it might be Christian mysticism, it could be Kabbalah, Sufism, maybe an indigenous path, something else. You know, there's a ton of them out there, and these pathways are embedded in every religion, right? Feel into what resonates with you. What's your lineage? You may be inexplicably drawn to a religion, maybe one that you also feel, you know, kind of funny about. So that's something to work out. But if you feel that draw, pay attention to it, okay? Because it's an indication that you've got a spiritual lineage there, right? So for many, this will correspond to your ancestry. But remember that we've been here for lifetimes, so you may have prior spiritual initiations in particular traditions, one or more, right, from previous lives. So when you align with a particular lineage, you create connections with the spiritual beings associated with it. Okay. So you can set this intention because each of us, and if you're on this awakening process enough to have followed me this far, you've been through initiation processes before. You already have connections with spiritual beings, probably in one primary lineage and perhaps several. Okay. So we can set the intention. I now connect fully with the spiritual beings of my lineage who will help me forward on my spiritual path. Okay, in conjunction with this, you can establish a meditation practice, right? Consistent meditation that will open your field to receiving guidance from these spiritual beings who are here to help you. And I guarantee you, you set that intention, it's going to show up for you in whatever way is appropriate for you. Okay, so now I'm not here to initiate you into any particular wisdom school. That's for you to find and your path to follow. But I do have a beautiful invitation for you. My Lightworkers Cafe community, we bring together beautiful awakening souls twice a month in spiritual community. It's an interfaith gathering. We are open to seekers of any lineage, whether you're practicing a religion or not. And it's really about creating a space where we can freely pursue our paths and have that community space that many people are missing. If you are looking for some place where we can come together as spiritual beings and still be free to follow our own path, I invite you to join us. You can learn more in the description box below. And remember, you were born to be free.